show. I'm Casey.
And I'm Fallon.
And this is
Render the Darkness.
So, I know you guys are accustomed to the fun facts, and I'm still going to give you one, but this one's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. This is more of a fun fact recommendation.
Okay.
So, this past weekend, I was scrolling around on TikTok, as one does, and I came across a page for a guy whose TikTok name is Murk, Murk. So he is he does lives out of New York, and he travels around the city and live, and he kind of shows you places and kind of just takes you on a fun little trip, and he's hilarious. He's got a great disposition. He's got an awesome sense of humor. He's got great fan engagement. Highly recommend if you have not come across him, if you enjoy humor, if you enjoy good personalities, if you enjoy walking around New York from the comfort of your home, I highly recommend you follow his page.
All right. I am not following him, but I will as of after this.
You definitely should. I definitely recommend it. And I asked him if it was okay for me to mention him on our podcast, and he said yes. So I do have permission. That is technically not financially sponsored, but sponsored with permission. So yay!
Hi, Murk.
Hi, Murk.
All right. So this is the second part of the murder of Ella Barham. In this episode, we will be going over like the inquest, the grand jury verdict, and the testimony of Dr. Taylor during the main trial. I'm going to say there is going to be a part 3. I'm sorry.
So somebody isn't following the rules. There are rules to the 50 State series, and we agreed before we started doing it that there would be no two-parters.
Why?
And I guess technically she's not doing a two-parter. She's going above and beyond the realm and doing a three-parter. As far as we know, it's going to be a 3-part. She doesn't know for sure that it's not going to be a 4-parter. So, we shall see how far this little journey takes us.
Yes.
Somebody is a rule breaker.
But in between parts 2 and 3, there is going to be a bonus episode, which I believe we talked about on the last episode.
Yes, there will be, and it was a recommendation, and it is going to be interesting and fun, and it's actually, like she said, it's going to be our next episode after this one, so bonus episode. I know for you guys following us, you're probably like, what the frick? This is the second bonus episode for Arkansas. Favoritism! It's not. We're getting a lot of recommendations for cases out of Arkansas. So if you're feeling a little jelly, or you're feeling like maybe your state's gonna get left out or not get the same amount of attention, shoot us some recommendations. If you send us one before we get to the state, I promise we will do it. Even if it takes us, even if there's 5 recommendations for the same state, we will do them all before we move on to the next.
Yep, we will do it.
We'll do it.
Send them on over.
Send it on over. Send it on over. I feel like that's a song. Is that a song? Did I just make that up? I like the beat. If I made that up, that was a great beat. I should write that down. Oh, you know what I'm thinking of? I can't use that beat. I'm thinking of that Moving On Over song. You know what I'm talking about? The commercial? Moving On Over.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like I said, I did steal it. I just parodied it, I guess. Not sponsored. Anyway, back to Ella.
Okay, so, like I said, we're going to go ahead and jump on into part 2. So, Saturday, J.H. Stewart went back to the crime scene wanting to look at the blood trail that he had found on the road leading to the treetop. While he was thinking of a way to get down into the ravine, he heard some voices yelling at him from below. A.L. Matlock and Everton Constable had the same idea and went back to look at the blood trail as well. Now, while he was investigating, he noticed the blood leading into the ravine. He followed that blood trail, and he found a 2 to 3 pound rock that was sticking out of the ground, covered in blood and hair. Now, Stewart joined Matlock and some other men, and Matlock pointed to the rock and the long, light hair that was stuck to it, which matched Ella's hair color. Stewart also saw at the bottom of the ravine a strange scattering of some leaves and sticks. It just looked odd to him, so he went over and moved the debris and found a very large rock that had blood on it, and another smaller one that had hair and blood on it as well. Now, the men picked up the large rock, and it moved pretty easily as if it had already been raised from the dirt. And they thought it weighed around 75 to 100 pounds. Now, the men found another rock that was covered with brush that had blood smeared all over the side. Stewart thought that because there was so much blood in the ravine compared to the treetop, that Ella could have been murdered at that location instead of the actual treetop.
Okay. I could see his logic on that.
Yeah. Now, the men kept looking, and close to the rock bank, they found Ella's shoes and her stockings. Someone had stuffed them under a rock and covered them with leaves. About 2 feet away from the rock, someone else found her back comb that was broken into pieces.
Her what?
Her back comb?
What's a back comb?
It's just a decoration that they put in their hair.
Oh.
Stewart now thought that Ella was taken to the ravine, then to the creek, then to the field, so he continued to try and find a path that the killer may have taken. So he went toward a cow path that was between the fence of Judge Davidson's field and the creek. Now he went west and he walked he walked the bank of the creek. After he went past the corner of the fence, he could see bloody spots on the pathway. He continued to walk along the path, and then he found two more areas that had blood. One didn't have much, but did have a ripped piece of fabric lying close by. The other area had a large amount of blood that was about the size of his palms, that was deep dark red. Now, Stewart knew he had found the killer's path. On the same day, Kansas Davidson watched on as Helm and 3 other men came to search his property for any evidence that may tie Otis to the crime.
Whoever committed this crime was really sloppy about it.
Yeah, they were. There was evidence everywhere.
I mean, everywhere.
Blood evidence everywhere. The men searched every inch inside the house, opening all the doors and checking every corner. They went through all the trunks, clothes, and even Nancy's sewing machine, but they didn't find anything. The men then went outside searching the cellar and the smokehouse, and because Kansas didn't have anything to hide, he took the men to his barn. Around this time, Matlock showed up to tell Kansas what they had found at the ravine. He and Hammond both noticed an axe at the woodpile. So Matlock grabbed the axe to look it over, and then he called Sheriff Helm over. Then he handed the axe to Hammond. Now, Hammond looked at the axe too, and he seen that there was a red sponge-like substance on the eye, which is where the wood shows through the hole on the blade.
Okay.
And the lower part of the handle was stained as well.
Okay, well, that's suspicious.
Kansas noticed the men looking at the axe, and he went to talk to them. And he said, quote, "I guess you think you have found something, an instrument that cut Ella Barham, don't you? Or do you? Sorry." And he would go on to tell the men that the week before he had actually used the axe to butcher a hog. He also explained that his sons were there, and so was J.H. Baum's wife, he had actually given a shoulder of the hog to. So the men left the barn, and Sheriff Helm took the axe back from Hammond, and he noticed that the handle was wet, and there seemed to be cotton threads stuck on the wood.
Some suspicious stuff going on here.
Right. Now, Sheriff Helm had Patterson look at it, and he also seen the thread, stain-handled, and the gummy substance that was in the eye.
The what?
The gummy substance.
Oh, they said gubby. I was like, what's a gubby? Sorry.
No, gummy. Sorry.
Okay. No, you're fine.
I probably didn't say it. Pronounce it, But he gave the axe back to Hammond and asked him to meet him at the graveyard later. Now, around 10 to 11 a.m., Sheriff Helm met Hammond, got the axe, tied a white handkerchief around the handle, and locked it away. Now, Saturday night, much to the surprise of everyone, Laird Davidson was arrested and was accused of being involved in Ella's murder because he was seen with Otis on the day Ella was killed and was said to have known about what Otis had done.
Hold on now. Wait a minute. I mean, they got so much evidence against Otis. Why are they arresting somebody else?
Well, because they think that he knew what Otis was planning on doing, and he knew that he'd done it, so...
Let's see where this goes. I don't like the direction this is taking.
Now, it didn't take long for the news about Laird's arrest to spread through town. As groups of outraged people began to gather around town, Sheriff Helm knew that he had to protect Otis and Laird. So he gathered his own group of men to surround the jail, and they would risk their lives to keep anyone from harming the prisoners. Even though he really tried to protect them there, the number of people wanting to get to Otis and Laird kept increasing. So Sheriff Helm had to move them somewhere else, and he had asked Deputy Sheriff Jones to help him.
Okay.
Now, late that night, Deputy Sheriff Jones took Otis and Laird to Berryville Jail to keep them safe, and they didn't tell anyone where they were going, and it was also said that Sheriff Helm may not have known either. And after the public found out that the men had been moved, things seemed to calm down. Now, again, the newspapers ran wild with stories, theories. One paper reported that the men left and may be hiding in a cave. Now, before either of the men were arrested, there were reports that people had their suspicions of the brothers because neither of them joined in the search for Ella. Another report said that Otis was seen with an axe close to where Ella was found on the day she died. One report said that the axe was covered in blood and found in his possession. Another said that the axe was found Saturday with blood and hair on it,
Okay.
which wasn't true.
Right.
Now, on Saturday, November 24th, four teenagers, William Thurman Ragsdale, Bill Brown, John Newells, and Leonard Taylor, had gone to see if they could find any of the rocks that may have been used in the murder. They had been looking around for about an hour when Thurman, who was by the treetop, stepped on some sticks and uncovered a pistol.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. Now, Thurman yelled to the others what he had found, and a group of people gathered where he was to see that he was holding a .22 caliber Smith & Wesson. Now, he looked to see if it was loaded, and it had 6 shells and an empty chamber.
Okay.
One of the men that was standing next to Thurman noticed that the gun was very muddy, which was really odd because it hadn't rained and it wasn't close to the creek. Now, thinking about how many people have been to that location over the days really surprised people that no one had found the gun sooner.
Yeah.
August Cleveland Sewall, who was a prosecuting attorney, gave Thurman a pencil and a notebook and had him write down the serial number and the names of all the people who had seen him find the gun. Sewall decided to arrange a new coroner's inquest and have it done in zinc.
So were they worried that they planted the gun there?
Yeah, they kind of had a suspicion that somebody put it there because, like I said, it was wet for some reason and muddy.
Okay.
All right. Kansas was no longer allowed to hold the position, so Andy Smith, who was the justice of the peace in zinc, was made the new coroner. Now, Kansas's jury was also disbanded, and a new one was formed. The new one consisted of 7 of the original jurors and 8 new ones, who were William Thomas Holder, George G. Marshall, Wiley Patton, Joseph A. Roberts, John Carroll Roberts, Joseph Wally Young, Eli Young, and Eli Young's cousin, who was also named Eli.
Okay.
Now, when Sewall was looking for the new jurors, he was making sure none were related to the Davidsons or the Barham families. However, nothing was said about Adam being related to the Barhams through marriage. On Tuesday, November 26th, Andy Smith and the new coroner's jury gathered around 12 p.m. at the Davidson graveyard. Dr. Taylor and Deputy Sheriff James Jones showed up with the axe. It was required by law in Arkansas for the jurors to go where the body was, and also states, if a body on which an inquisition ought to have been held by interred without inquisition, the coroner may cause the body to be disinterred to hold an inquisition thereon. What that boils down to is a coroner or a medical examiner can have a body exhumed if they think the person died under suspicious circumstances, according to the Arkansas Coroners Association. Now, because Kansas had not finished the Inquisition and there were a lot of new members, Andy Smith wanted to follow the law, and he had Ella exhumed and re-examined in the graveyard.
Okay.
Now, Ella was placed on top of a wood plank, partly wrapped in the white burial shroud, and the jurors surrounded her, and Dr. Taylor started his examination. Now, same as the first time, Dr. Taylor said that Ella had been assaulted. Then Dr. Taylor examined a laceration that was on her right hip. He used a stick to measure it and compared that to the blade on the axe, which was almost a perfect match.
Okay.
Now, the jurors then started to talk about the possible reasons, fashion, and the circumstances surrounding her death. Now, Andy began the interrogation in a temporary courtroom that was partially lit by a I don't know what that was partially lit by a coal oil lamp. Now, on the advice of their lawyers, the Davidson brothers wouldn't answer any questions, and the whole time in zinc, they didn't talk to anyone, and they stayed very emotionless.
They're really not helping themselves, are they?
No, not really. Now, the jurors asked that Otis's foot be measured and compared to the footprints that were found at the creek.
Fair.
Now, one of the men put some paper down and sprinkled flour on it, and they had him remove his shoes and press his feet onto the flour. Now, Bentley Brown, who was the one who had measured the prints at the creek, he measured the ones in the flour, and they didn't match. Otis's prints were smaller and shorter. So the jurors were wondering if the difference was because he was carrying something heavy at the creek, and now he wasn't. Now, even though the prints didn't match, they would be the most damaging evidence that was used against Otis. A little after midnight, Smith paused the investigation for the day. Wednesday morning, the investigation continued with more than 30 witnesses, and 25 of them would testify. Only taking breaks for meals, the investigation went well into the night. Now, Sewall made it his mission to prove that Ella had been taken from her horse around 11 a.m. Then the person took her to the treetop where they assaulted and murdered her. They then took her body to the ravine, took her clothes, and hid her under some brush until nightfall. He claimed that they came back, took her to the creek where they dismembered her, and took her to the bluff. J.H. Stewart believed because most of the blood was at the bottom of the ravine, Ella may have been dismembered there. Now, the jurors were trying to figure out what the motive may have been for Otis to do what he had done to Ella, if he had done it at all. One newspaper called the Tennessee Commercial Appeal would publish that Otis had liked Ella since she was 12. He tried to get her to enter into a relationship with him many times, but Ella had always refused. One reporter wrote that he had made another attempt on the Sunday before her death. Again, Ella refused, and Otis insulted her. So Ella would tell her family about the occurrence, but they didn't really want to make a big deal out of it, so they didn't do anything. To prove that allegation to be wrong, Otis's girlfriend, Cora, was called to testify. Now, she said that they had actually planned on getting married the day that he was arrested, and Otis's family claimed the same. Another question on everyone's mind was whether anyone had been close to the location and had they seen or heard anything that day. One woman by the name of Susie Tabor, who lived close to where Ella was found, said that she had heard someone scream between the hours of 10 and 11 a.m. She went to see if someone maybe needed help, but she didn't find anyone. Now, when asked where Otis was during the murder, his family all claimed that he was at home or close by on the property. But when Sewall asked Cora about the morning of the murder, she said that she went by the Davidsons' home to see if Otis was home while on her way to the post office, and he wasn't. He also asked if she had asked Nancy or anyone else where Otis was, and she said that she spoke to Nancy and asked both times, and Iva would confirm the interaction. Now, the jurors had another question. Was Otis acting strange since Ella's death? According to the Mountain Echo, Otis was crying the day after her murder for, quote, no apparent cause. It supposedly happened when Ella was being buried. While many people were crying, the reporter said that his tears seemed more like those that came from guilt. Another question the juror had was, what about the axe and the other evidence?
Okay.
Davidson's family would again say that they had used the axe a week before the murder to butcher a pig, and that is why the axe had blood on it.
Yeah.
However, Alex Davidson, who is the younger brother, said that Otis had the axe with him on the day of the murder, going to check his traps around 12:30 p.m.
Okay.
Next, Thurman Ragsdale testified about the gun found, and according to Tennessee Commercial Appeal, that testimony did prove that Otis was the owner of that gun. Next, they inspected the socks, and his family would testify that he put pepper in his socks to keep his feet warm. His shoes were examined next, and they too had red pepper in them. Kansas, Ivy, and Dixon were all questions, but their stories were pretty confusing. Ivy would say that Otis wore a light colored shirt on the day of Ella's murder. Kansas said that Otis had overalls that he didn't wear anymore, which were found during the search along with other clothing items. But Ivy said that Otis didn't have any overalls. Otis's clothes were examined as well, and they didn't find any blood anywhere on them.
What a strange line of events. Like, like, who do you believe? Like, what?
Yeah, I don't know. It's like one person saying, "Oh no, this happened." The other one's like, "No, this happened." They're like, "No, this happened." It's like,
Like, yeah, like how are they supposed to have any idea what direction to go? You know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of, like when you see in the movies, and like there's like a whole group of people who really rally around this one person, and this one person like committed a crime or whatever, And then like another person walks in, and they're like, I want to know who committed this crime. So then like slowly, one by one, everybody in the crowd starts going, I did it.
Oh
I
yeah.
did it. No, I did it. And then like the whole crowd is claiming they all did it.
Yeah.
Like that's what this is kind of reminding me of, that like everybody's trying to have his back, but nobody collaborated about what they were gonna say.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly what it sounds like. All right, so outside the building, a large group of people waited to hear the verdict. Even though the evidence against the brothers was purely circumstantial, a lot of people really didn't know how they felt about it. So close to midnight, the head of the jury came out and said a decision had been reached. The verdict for the inquest reads as, quote, "We, the jury, find that Miss Ella Barham came to her death on last Thursday, the 21st of November 1912, by the hands of Otis Davidson, and that Laird Davidson, his brother, is an accessory before the fact." So this verdict meant that the brothers would have to go in front of a grand jury and be kept in jail until then. Now, 2 days after the inquest, the Batesville Daily Guard published this about Otis's guilt that said, "No one will deny that a man guilty of a murder such as that one in Zinc in this state last week ought to hang. Death is the only punishment that will mete out sufficient revenge on such a man and for such a crime. And the sooner one of that sort is executed and society rid of him, the better. But be sure the guilty suffer and not the innocent. Circumstantial evidence is a dangerous thing, and yet in this case, as in many others, it is the only sort of evidence to be had. No one saw the man kill the girl. The bloody axe was found at his home, and there were other things that point to his guilt, but they are not of themselves sufficient evidence on which to base a conviction." On that same day, the North Arkansas Star published this in Otis's defense, which was the only newspaper to actually ever do so. So they said, "As to the guilt of the men, the editor of the Star thinks it's extremely doubtful. From what we can learn from the officers, no evidence whatsoever has been found, except some very remote circumstances. All of the clothes of Otis Davidson, who as thou thought might have committed the deed, have been thoroughly examined, and not a drop of blood has been found on them. No weapon with which the body could have been so mutilated had been found, and the actions and demeanor of the man is not that of a man who committed such a crime. He is perfectly composed, answers all questions promptly, and gives the most plausible reasons for all of his actions on the day, besides assuring the officers and others that he will have no trouble in proving an alibi at his trial." Sorry, I'm going to take a drink of water. Not used to talking this much, y'all.
That's not true. She talks all the time. She just usually has me interrupting her, so it's not like a consecutive thing, but she does talk this much. Well, in like a back and forth kind of a scenario.
Okay, well, excuse me, I don't talk this much.
Consecutively.
All right, so another newspaper, the Benton County Democrat, published on Thursday this article that was about Otis's uncle. It says Reverend T. H. Burgess of this place was a guest Sunday night in the home of an uncle of the accused man, and learned from the talk there that relatives of Davidson feel that the officers have the right man. So some of his family did think, that he was the one that did it.
Yeah.
Now, on Monday, January 13th, the indictment trial began. Reverend Agee of the Baptist Church would open court with a prayer. Sheriff Helm named all of the men who were in the grand jury. The jurors already knew a lot of the information regarding the case because of the press and the people talking about it so much. The judge called their names one by one to make sure they were all there, and then he asked them all questions to make sure they qualified. The clerk, Marvin Hathcote, swore them in by saying, quote, "Saving yourselves and fellow jurors, you do swear that you will diligently inquire of and present all treasons, felonies, misdemeanors, and breaches of the penal laws over which you have jurisdiction, of which you have knowledge or may receive information." The judge had John Newton Tillman give the jurors instructions. He then explained the different types of felonies and misdemeanors, the jobs of the jury, and the limits for bringing the actions. He explained the difference between first-degree and second-degree murder, manslaughter, and how the law applied to when women were assaulted. Now, when the grand jury deliberated, it was private. No one was allowed to speak of the discussion or votes from the jurors. The only people allowed to be in the room were the prosecuting attorney and the witnesses. Now, when they were discussing the charges, though, they too had to leave. The grand jury examined the charges against the brothers, and they had 30 witnesses, and 19 of those were for the state. On Tuesday, January 14th, 1913, the grand jury finished with their investigation, and the court went home for the night. On Wednesday, January 15th, 1913, W.F. Gordon gave their verdict for the indictment. Otis and Lair were both charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder, and Lair was also charged with 4 counts of being an accessory before the fact. They would now go to a jury trial. And on Friday, January 17th, 1913, Otis and Lair were brought to the courtroom. Their attorney filed a motion to quash, which meant he wanted to object to the indictment.
So just so I'm following you correctly, just so I'm understanding where we're at this point. So it went from Lair being arrested because he was being accused of knowing about it to now he is being charged with helping do it.
Yes. He's being charged with helping and being an accessory before the fact.
Okay, that's insane. They have literally zero evidence to support that.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Now, he claimed that the documents didn't have any sufficient facts. He specifically challenged the last part of the indictment that read, quote, "It being intended throughout each count in this indictment to charge the offenses herein set out as having been committed in different manners and by different means, but all referring to one and the same transaction." So he claimed that because the charges against the brothers were separate and inconsistent with each other, that they shouldn't be covered by a single indictment. The judge overruled both motions, and the defense asked that the request be noted. Now, Arkansas law gave defendants who were jointly indicted for a felony to have separate trials and also allowed them to choose the order that they would be tried in. The defense asked that the trials be separated, and the judge set Otis's trial for Monday, January 20th. And he would be facing murder in the first degree, and his attorney put Otis's plea in as not guilty. Now, Lair's trial date would depend on the outcome of Otis's trial. Prosecuting attorney Sewall asked that Otis and Lair be separated and not to be allowed to talk to each other. Lair was then taken to the Marshall jail, and Otis was locked up in Harrison. The fact that Lair was moved made it very clear that he couldn't be made to testify against Otis. Being Boone County Sheriff, Helm was tasked with finding suitable jurors, and he looked as far away from where the murder happened to try to find them. In July of 1912, 24 men had been selected, but Sheriff Helm knew that most, if not all, wouldn't qualify because they all knew about the case and had already had their opinions on it.
It's a pretty big case. That's a pretty big situation.
Yeah. During this time, finding jurors wasn't easy because every man had to be either hand-delivered the summons by a sheriff or deputy, or if the person wasn't home, someone they lived with that was over the age of 10 could also accept the summons. Now, out of those men, 3 didn't show up because they were never found, 2 were sick, and 1 was disqualified. The court added 4 men, and Sheriff Helm added 2 bystanders. On Monday, January 20th, Judge Reed called the court to order, and the prosecuting attorneys Gus Sewall, Troy Pace, and Arch Crump, and the defense attorneys B.B. Hutchins, E.G. Mitchell, Oscar Hutchins, and Tony Parrish all said that they were ready for the trial. Sheriff Helm, Clerk Marvin, Hathcote, and all the jurors were ready as well. Otis just sat there with no expression on his face, with his father seated pretty close to him. Ella's family was there waiting for answers and justice for what had happened to her. Because there were so many people wanting to see the outcome of the trial, the courtroom was overflowing with people. There were so many that some people had to stand in the hallway and some had actually had to stand outside on the grass. Reporters wanted to get a good story, so they were fighting over seats. A lot of the people wanted to see the face of the accused murderer, and others wanted to give their sympathies and respect to Ella's family. The first thing that the court had to do was pick the permanent jury. The judge would question the men about their qualifications. Attorneys could challenge a juror by either for cause or the, I had issues with this, and I'm going to, peremptory challenge. That's what I'm going to go with. A cause could be used if the person seemed to be of unsound mind, if they were a felon, or if they seemed to be biased in any way, and these challenges had no limit of how often that they could be used. Now, the preemptory challenges didn't have a reason. They could just refuse a juror just because. Okay. Now, but instead of having infinite challenges like the cause, the prosecuting attorney could only use that one 10 times, and the defense could only use it up to 20 times in felony cases.
That seems like a lot. Yeah.
Now, it took 2 days to find a full jury of 12, and the court actually questioned 207 people.
Good Lord.
The jurors were then sworn in by Clerk Marvin Hathcote, and because it took so long to get a full jury on day 2, they adjourned until the next day. On Wednesday, January 22nd, 1913, just before 6 a.m., about 1,500 people had gone to the courthouse to see the trial. The courtroom was only meant to hold about 600 people, but 1,200 people crammed in, with hundreds standing in the room, and again, some had to stand outside. A little after 8 a.m., Seawall started with his opening statement. Unfortunately, there is no record of what he had actually said, but more than likely explained to the jury the horrific details of the murder, the evidence found, and Otis's supposed motive. The defense, the defense then started their opening statement claiming that Ella had not been murdered by Otis, but by someone else who is also responsible for the recent murders involving entire families with an axe in other states like Illinois and Colorado. He also claimed that the evidence would be shown to prove that statement.
Okay.
Now, the statement that he made about the other murders was actually true. There was a span of murders of 19 people in Colorado, Illinois, Kansas, and Iowa.
Okay, well, that's pretty pertinent information.
Yeah. And he also claimed that strangers had been seen around the area on the day of the murder, which again was true. On the day Ella was killed, the Barham neighbors would tell the police that they had seen 3 to 4 men around the neighborhood, but for some reason they didn't follow up on the reports.
Yeah, but the ones who were killed with the axe or whatever, were they mutilated the way that she was? Like dismembered and all that?
Dude, I can't say it yet.
Okay.
You're asking too many questions.
That's like my second question. I'm sorry, I'm interested in your case.
That's okay. It's okay. I'm just messing with you. Around 12 p.m., Dr. Taylor was called to testify. He was asked to describe the state in which he had found Ella's body. He would stand and point to the different spots of his body and say, quote, "Well, I found the head chopped off pretty close up to the base of the skull. It was chopped in two at the waist. Both legs were cut off about 3 or 4 inches below the crotch. That is the condition I found the remains of the deceased when I was called to see her. Then her head was absolutely crushed."
That's awful. Poor woman.
I feel really bad for her. It's just terrible. Now, the doctor was then asked about the assault, and he said that Ella could have been assaulted by more than one man. He was then asked to describe the rest of Ella's body to the jury, and he did, and it was the same as his first finding. He was then asked to go over the morning that he went to the Davidson's home. He would claim that when he got there, Kansas was talking to 2 other men about the murder, and that Otis had come into the room for just a few minutes before leaving without saying anything. The prosecuting attorney wanted to show the jury how Otis wasn't bothered about what happened to Ella. Now, the defense attorney was next to ask his questions. He had asked Dr. Taylor how long he had known Otis, and he would say about 8 years. Then he was asked if Otis was always quiet when he's seen him in other places. Dr. Taylor would say that yes, he has always been a quiet man. He was then asked when he had thought that Otis may have had something to do with Ella's death, and he would say it was during the autopsy. The defense then tried to make the jurors think that the doctor was negligent by saying that he should have gone and examined Otis as soon as he thought he may have committed the crime, looking for blood or any kind of cuts or abrasions that may have happened during the murder. The defense would also ask why he didn't use a microscope to verify that body fluids had been found. And Dr. Taylor would say that he didn't think that there was one in the county that he could use. Defense attorney Mitchell then proceeded to ask Dr. Taylor the difference between arterial blood and venous blood and exactly where each was found.
Arterial.
That's what I was going to say at first, was like in my brain, I was like, that don't sound right. But yeah. He wanted to show that if Otis had murdered Ella, he would have been covered in blood. Dr. Taylor would explain that arterial blood comes from the arteries and is almost scarlet in color, and when the artery on a living person is severed, that it spurts out blood. Mm-hmm. He also said that the blood spatter on the road was arterial blood. He would then claim that the venous blood comes from the veins and is a lot darker and slowly flows from the body, and he would say that the blood from Ella's head wound was the venous blood that was seen at the treetop. The defense then asked what would happen if someone dismembered a dead body, and Dr. Taylor would say that there wouldn't be any arterial bleeding, and if any time had passed, or if enough time had passed, there wouldn't be any bleeding at all. The defense definitely didn't get the answer that they were looking for. They were hoping that Dr. Taylor would say that there would be blood everywhere. They wanted to say that Otis couldn't have done it because there wasn't any blood on him, but Dr. Taylor's answer made that theory seem pretty weak.
So they were hoping he would say that after she was dead and her heart had stopped, her blood would still be moving.
Yep. That's what they were really hoping that he would have said. But defense continued the questioning by asking if Ella's clothes had blood on them. And he would say yes, and the defense asked how someone could have assaulted her and not got any blood on him. and he would respond with saying that they could have done it before her death. And Dr. Taylor would also explain that he thought Ella had been forced off of her horse at gunpoint, taken to the treetop, assaulted and murdered, and the person behind the crime dismembered her to make her body easier to hide. The defense then asked if her skull had been crushed during the dismemberment, but he claimed that that was actually what had killed her. He was then asked why he believed she had been murdered at the treetop, and he said, quote, "In my opinion, she received a murderous blow at this particular place. The blood looked to me that she received a lick in the face. The blood spattered two ways, each side, as if she was hit in the nose and the face mashed the nose badly." So Mitchell, with a single follow-up, confronted Dr. Taylor by saying, quote, "I will ask you if it is not a fact within your knowledge, if it has not been in type the newspapers for the last 2 years, that there has been a horrible series of crimes committed by some human fiend with an axe. By someone in Colorado within the past year killed with an axe, another man in Kansas killed with an axe, and another man in Illinois. Did that not strike you as a physician to connect it if you could?" Now, one of the state attorneys objected to that statement and started to argue with Mitchell.
Understandably so. I could see why that would be a contemptuous thing to say.
Yeah. The judge decided to dismiss the question because he said it didn't have any kind of connection to the present case, which he was correct, because Ella wasn't murdered while she was sleeping. She died by a traumatic head injury caused by a large rock and in the middle of the day. The axe was only used to dismember her body, not to kill her. She was also assaulted and alone, unlike the other axe murder victims. Because it was said that all of them were actually killed in their sleep.
So definitely not the same MO.
No, not at all.
So that kind of debunks that whole idea.
Which
I mean, they're defense attorneys. That's their job, is to find any avenue of defense
right.
they can find. And if that was happening around the time, I could see why they might want to try to jump on that bandwagon.
Which after I read that, I was like, no, like that sounds very familiar.
Like not Lizzie Borden.
No, like like where a bunch of different families were killed with an axe while they were sleeping, and I think one actually had two of their friends were sleeping over.
Oh yeah, the lady who was had just moved into the cabin or whatever, and she had invited
something like that.
I remember. I know what case you're talking about. I can't remember the name of the case, but I know what case you're talking about.
Yeah.
And the oldest daughter was like not there for some reason. She stayed the night somewhere else.
I think so.
Yeah, something like that. I know what you're talking about. I can't place the name of it either, but I know. Yeah. I know what case you're talking
about. Now, the attorney for the state reaffirmed with Dr. Taylor about the blood found at the treetop. The statement he had made about the blood being on Ella's clothes and that there wasn't any blood found on Otis's clothes. He also pointed out that the doctor didn't know what Otis was wearing on the day Ella was murdered. Mitchell then began questioning the doctor again. He again talked about how Ella's clothes were covered in blood and how it wouldn't be possible for the killer not to get any blood on them or their clothing during the act. Now, Dr. Taylor would claim that he had seen Otis 3 times on Friday, and each time he was wearing a gray suit. Mitchell didn't say what Otis was wearing on the Thursday of the murder because he wanted people to assume that he had worn the same thing on that day as he did on Friday because it didn't have any blood on it. Okay. Now, Dr. Taylor's testimony lasted most of the morning, and he was dismissed that afternoon so the next witness could testify. So that's where I'm going to leave you for part 2.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of information in that one.
Yes, there was a lot of information in that one. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to make my conclusion ahead of time here before part 3. I'm sorry. I don't know who's going to agree with me, who's not going to agree with me, but I think Otis did it. Like, that dude's suspicious as fudge. I mean, he just is. I mean, his behavior is suspicious. Is everybody trying to, like, cover for him with all different stories is suspicious. Just everything about his crush on her. I mean, he definitely had a motive.
Yeah.
I mean, not that somebody needs a motive, but he had one for sure, having a crush on her, and she kept rejecting him. Like, I don't know, man. There's like a gut feeling, but I think O'Lear, if he gets convicted and sentenced to death, I think that was the wrong choice on that one. I don't think he had as much to do with it as they're trying to claim he did.
Yeah.
I don't think they have any reason to believe that whatsoever, other than they're brothers.
Yeah.
That's it. That's literally their only connection. They're brothers.
Yeah. I don't really understand it. really either. But like I said, we'll just have to wait to see what happens in part 3. Hopefully, I can get all this wrapped up in part 3. I'm really hoping.
It's an interesting case, so
Yeah.
I'm here for it. However many parts you need it to be, I'm all on board.
I appreciate it very much.
Jumped on this train on part 1.
Yeah.
No stopping for me until the train ride is done.
All right.
All right, well, very interesting. Lots of details in this one. It sounds like the trial got to be a little bit of a circus at some points.
Yeah, it was.
They were trying to hit every ball they could find, and it was both ways. Like the prosecutors were doing everything they could to put the blame on him, and the defense was doing everything they could to take the blame off of him.
Right.
Which I mean is what prosecutors and defense attorneys do, but there's usually like a limit to how far they'll go. Like these attorneys seem like there was no limit. They are pulling out all the stops. They're finding any little thread of anything they can find and pulling it as hard as they can.
No, I mean,
which is the kind of lawyer you want, but
I was just say, well, it was 1912 too, so they probably didn't have as many rules and stuff that we have today. So
no, that's true.
I got away with a lot more back in the day too. Because I mean, there's a lot more information on this testimony and other things, like I said, in the book that I didn't, include in this part. But like I said, there is a lot of information. So if you do want to know,
excuse me, sorry,
what I didn't talk about, definitely go check out the book.
When you're done checking out that book, go check out Merc.
Merc. Hi, Merc.
And real quick before we wrap this up, because I forgot to do it at the beginning, I just want to say and add that we have a lot more followers and we have quite a few more subscribers as well. And so we want to say thank you. Welcome. Hi. Welcome to the fam. Just us. Just us.
It's terrible. Sorry.
So yeah, thank you guys for that. And like we've said on a couple other episodes before, if you like what we're doing, please give us a subscribe, a like, a share. We're on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, pretty much any social media you could think of. Anywhere you get your podcasts, we're on that too. If you have a YouTube channel that you would like supported by fellow creators that want to support people who are trying to grow, we're all about it. Just shoot us a message. We'll follow it every time.
Yep. Every time.
Every time. And on a completely separate note, just for the TikTok world out there, if anybody wants to know where I'm located,
I've been getting so many of those today.
You're just gonna have to watch my podcast and find out. And if you do, while you're here, you might as well go ahead and subscribe.
Yeah.
Just throwing that one out there. I know I know we're not the only ones. But anyway, for the people who really are following because they're genuinely interested or because they're supporting or for whatever reason you're following other than to be weird in a bad way, thank y'all very much. Yes. We really do appreciate it. We know and understand how valuable time is. I know you can't tell from my ramblings, but we appreciate you.
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Tell your friends.
Every time I do this, I just want to go, Hercules, Hercules, Hercules.
Not sponsored, not sponsored. Cakes and pies, cakes and pies. But I think that's it for this episode. And again, we're only on Arkansas. We're doing all 50 states, y'all.
We're giving you more time. Is what we're really doing.
That's what we're
just
doing.
Trying to,
We're letting you have a little time to think and come up with the cases you really want to hear us do.
Yeah, let it marinate in your brain. Get some,
That's a weird word. Marinate. Anyway. And that's it as far as I know. You got anything else?
Marinate.
All right.
That's it.
Okay. Well, we are
Render the darkness.